All right, the recording has begun. We can get started.
Okay,
Welcome,
great.
everybody. People are still calling in, but I want to honor the punctual by getting started here. So, welcome to another in the New Paradigm of Business series of video interviews. Today, I'm joined by Jorge Silva, who I will introduce in a few minutes. I want to tee up the topic a little bit first. So I'm doing these interviews on and off. There's been a big gap between this one and the prior one. Trying to educate business leaders and consultants and other interested folks about how business is evolving and trying to get some sense of what business will look like after it has successfully evolved. And since we're in the middle of the process right now, it's a little hard to tell exactly what it's going to look like when it's evolved. So these different topics, these different videos have been on different kind of aspects of how business is evolving. And the main topic for today is transparency. But as you'll see, Jorge has been experimenting and innovating in a number of different ways. And so I'm not going to restrict the conversation just to transparency, although that's the main topic. There's a number of things I want to pick his brain about. Um, so the idea behind the topic of transparency is that in business, and this is what I encountered working my way up through the ranks at Oracle Corporation, was the idea that knowledge is power. And if knowledge is power, then that means that you should hoard the knowledge. You should keep it to yourself. And that means that you have more power. And now you can use that power. Oh, Charlie's very excited about this topic. Charlie, come here. Come on. No, he's going back upstairs. So you can hoard this information and use it as power within the organization. Um, and in particular, hierarchy as a structure lends itself to this kind of power hoarding, because what will tend to happen is that the people at the top wind up gathering a lot of information and then making decisions about which of that information they think the people further down in the hierarchy need to know, and try to imagine what effects releasing that information might have, and then make decisions. Well, let's release this information, let's not release that information. And this runs into a feature of hierarchy, which is the parent-child relationship that gets created between managers and their subordinates. And in a parent-child relationship, the parent is often trying to protect the child, an actual parent with an actual child, trying to protect the child from having information that might not be good for them to know. And since we psychologically inadvertently create that dynamic in a hierarchy, the managers and executives start to think in exactly the same way. Well, it's best if the employees don't know that. I'm not sure it would be good if they found out about that. Let's not disclose that information. And this becomes sort of a habit. And it varies from company to company how much it goes on, but it usually goes on a lot. And the result, what we used to call in the Navy, I spent 23 years in the Navy, we used to call mushroom management, which meant keep them in the dark, feed them excrement, and see what grows, which was the sort of the saying about this particular strategy for disclosing, or more often not disclosing, information to people. Um, so that was the basic idea: is hoard the information, um, have more information with the people who have more power, less information with the people who have less power, and dispense the information carefully, secretively, and in ways that enable you to use it to enhance your own power. Now that's kind of on a bad day, but a fair amount of that goes on in most organizations. So what happens if we change things dramatically? What happens if we go for much more transparency? Well, that's what we're going to find out about today, among other things. Um, and I know of a few examples of this. There's something called open book management, where people can see the finances of the company and sometimes see each other's salaries as well. And I also know of a company that has been, I wish I could remember the name of it, where they've been working with travel expenses, where they publish everybody's travel expenses to all the people inside the company. So you can go look and see when someone else went on a trip, what they purchased and how much they spent. And in large companies, controlling travel expenses is a huge project where there's all these people and all these policies dedicated to trying to keep the travel expenses down. And this company just published it all, and suddenly all the travel expenses went down dramatically. No policies. All you had to do was explain why you had spent this money, and then that was that. And then you could see, uh, everyone could see what you had spent, what you spent it on, how much, and why. And then suddenly people started to be much more frugal. So there's interesting effects that come with transparency, and also some potential downsides. So if you were planning on publishing all of your employees' salaries to one another, you might want to think carefully about that and research that first. And listening to a talk like this one would be a good start. So that's kind of the background for the whole topic of transparency. And the reason I wanted to interview Jorge is because he has gone further in implementing this than anyone I've actually ever met. And I have met people who've done this before, but not to the extent he has. So Jorge is founder of Ten Pines, which is a software development company in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Um, and the company has a lot of other interesting features that we're going to talk about this hour, in addition to the transparency. But I want to start with that. So Jorge, talk to us a little bit about, like, what gave you the idea in the first place that you wanted to do things in this really open way? Like, where did the impulse come from?
Well, hi. First thing first, I want to thank you for having me here.
Oh,
It's an honor to, yeah, it's an honor to talk with you, with a lot of people present. And the other thing was, I'm a co-founder of the company. I'm not the
mhm.
only founder,
Yep.
so it's important for,
Good. Get the
it's part
record
for my,
straight. Give credit where
yeah,
credit's due.
yeah, yeah.
I want your
So,
co-founder to watch this video and go, "Hey,
yeah,
wait a
hey, yeah,
minute."
they are missing out.
Who's the
Yeah.
co-founder, just so we can give full
Yeah,
credit?
okay. One of them is Hernan Wilkinson.
Hmm.
The other one is Emilio Buter. And the last one is Alejandra Alfonso.
Excellent. Great.
So
Thanks.
we are four. Yeah.
Hmm.
So the first, about the question, well, I think that we, at the first moment, we have like two main inspirations. The first one was like a gut feeling of feeling that something wasn't wrong with the way that we were working in another companies, and we are really committed, and we came from the agile world, so we understood that some of the decisions and some of way of working that we use in the operation field. I mean, when we develop software, we thought that we should use that in how to run a company.
Hmm.
So at the beginning, we have like this kind of feeling that we should use something similar, where you have like I don't know, you rely a lot in the wisdom of the crowd,
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
the people is going to understand the problem, that the more voices that you have, the better for the decision. And in that kind of situation, you have to share information in order to the other people to see and to evaluate every different aspect to make a decision.
Right.
And the other thing that was an inspiration for us was a company called Semco in Brazil.
Hmm.
Uh, you have the CEO there is Ricardo Semler.
Hmm.
He wrote a book called Maverick, and he tells about all the different aspects that is involved in his company. And he have like a similar policy of open book management. And we thought that that was cool, and that was interesting, and was a really approach on how to make decision and how to treat the information in the company.
Yeah.
So I think that that was the main inspiration, and the main, yeah, reasons why we start to thinking about that. And after that, there is a really big, or a really long journey when you have to implement it, right? But the
Hmm.
first thing that we saw, and that we understood that we want that path, was in that two reasons.
Right. So inspired by Agile at a team level, and thinking
Yeah,
about how to do that at an organization level on the one hand, and the other inspired by Ricardo Semler and Semco,
right.
which I believe since then a Dutch company has codified what they did into something called Semco style.
Yeah.
And they now do consulting and
Yeah.
trainings to help organizations adopt some of the principles
Yeah.
of SEMCO.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
There is a like a Semco style institute. Yeah.
right,
And yeah, I think that the first one is that we have the agile mindset, right?
right.
And if you have the agile mindset, you start looking at things differently.
Good.
It's
So
like
let's
you are
give the audience, because not everyone here is a software
okay,
developer.
okay,
So
okay.
so agile is a team-based process, right? So you would have a team using. So if you think about it, something like hierarchy or holacracy or the collaborative operating system or Semco style is a kind of like an operating system for an organization. So you can have an entire organization operating according to any one of several different systems. We'll get more into that in a minute. Um,
Yeah,
and then also you could have teams operating according to different systems, right? So there's people who teach how to run teams, how to operate teams, different ways of operating teams. Most teams are hierarchical because they're operating inside a hierarchy.
yeah,
But not all team management styles are hierarchical, and agile is not. So you have these agile teams, which is a software development methodology, right? So now you've got these agile teams operating. But something I've run into, Jorge, is that when organizations use agile, the agile isn't a system for running the whole organization.
yeah,
It's a
right.
team operating system.
Yeah,
And so
right.
now you need an organization over these teams coordinating their activities,
Yeah,
and by default, that's usually hierarchy, which in my limited experience is a terrible fit for
yeah,
doing that.
right.
That the
Yeah,
interface between the hierarchical people who tell the team, okay, go develop this by Tuesday, and the people in the team
yeah,
say, no, 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 that's not how Agile works. You can't
yeah,
tell us to develop it by
yeah,
Tuesday. That's
yeah,
not, we're
right.
not going to do that. And you
Well, this
create
is
all this friction. So say
yeah.
something about that. So,
Yeah, well, this is the classical mismatch that you have. Is like you want to work in a self-management team because agile. One of the values is that the team is deciding everything,
mhm,
and you have to rely on self-management. But in the other hand, you have the team inside the corporation or inside a company that is a hierarchical company. So what happens in the day by day example is that you are working in something because the team decide to do that, and the CEOs come in and say, no, you don't have to go that way, you have to go the other way.
mhm.
So you broke the all the idea of working in an agile way, and this was
Which, by the way, has a huge negative effect on the
yeah,
employee
right,
engagement of the team members. Now they're all like
yeah,
upset and
yeah,
frustrated and feel disempowered because their process got overridden by some
yeah,
hierarchical leader, and only have to do that a couple times before it
yeah,
just takes all the wind out of their
yeah.
sails.
Let's say that it's running different levels, in many different levels,
Hmm.
because besides the agile mindset, it is not the best thing to do, because most of the time, uh, the people that is deciding something is because of something. It's not because it is like they want to do that uh, because of nothing. So
Hmm.
so this is one of the biggest mismatch that we saw, and what we understood is that we have to find something that is more fitable
Hmm.
with the agile mindset, with the operations, and with and how to run a company. And
Hmm.
I would say that the agile mindset is not just for software development. Right now it's like a lot of different industries that you can use an agile approach.
Hmm.
And I would say that it's more like a different way of project management,
Hmm.
where you go away from the how do you say, the waterfall or the
Yeah.
Fordism
Yeah. So
way of
the waterfall is a classic metaphor used for a sort of design and specify
hmm
and then develop and then test and release, and then it's how we used to do things when I was running software development
yeah,
for for different things at
Hmm.
Oracle Corporation. And so this is now a much more rapid
Yeah.
test, implement, and try in a very
Yeah.
short cycle
Yeah.
versus these really long
Hmm.
projects that last a year and a half, 2, 3 years to get a new version out. We see that with like Microsoft, where the time between revisions of Windows
Yeah.
can
Where
can
yeah,
get very long.
getting shorter. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
anyway, so now, so you've seen, so you guys were committed to using Agile, right? That was
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
an initial condition for you and the other founders, is like, okay, we're going to use Agile, and you'd seen it work poorly with hierarchy.
Yeah.
So how did you go about structuring? This is actually another big benefit of this talk for those of you listening, is this is an example of what I would call a homegrown self-organizing system.
Mm.
So if you want to create, if you don't want to use hierarchy and you'd rather use a self-organizing system, right? You read Reinventing Organizations or something like that, and you're like, oh, I want to use a self-organizing system. You can shop for and buy one, like Holacracy or the Collaborative Operating System or Sociocracy or Semco Style or something like that, and kind of take one off the shelf and read the operating instructions and how to
Yeah.
install it, right?
Yeah.
Um, or you can create your own. And
Yeah.
so it appears to me that Jorge and his buddies at Ten Pines made their own self-organizing system, which is really interesting because it's very hard to do, and it
Yeah.
doesn't happen successfully very often. So I'm
Yeah.
always very
Yeah.
curious when someone's able to pull it off. So
Yeah.
how'd you do it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, actually, something important to say is that we are like 10 years old,
Mhm.
so this is not a recently
Not a recent development.
implementation. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So
When
and
did you start this the development of the self-organizing system right from the beginning, or did you use
yeah,
hierarchy for a while and then switch?
no, no. For the beginning, we start working that way, and
Mhm.
this is important because sometimes I they ask me how to evolve to a different kind of management or to a similar to what we do, uh, and it's a different approach because if you have to evolve or to transform to a
Right.
different kind of management, is a different approach.
So in your
If
case,
you
you were
start from the
starting
beginning,
from nothing and you could create
yeah,
whatever you wanted, and someone else is
yeah,
running a hierarchy and says, "How do you
yeah,
get from what I'm doing to what you're doing?" And the correct
yeah.
answer is, "I don't know. That's not how we did
Yeah.
it."
Yeah, we
Good
have
luck
to
with that.
discover that together. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
About
what
the
were some of the
question,
principles that guided your thinking when you were
yeah.
creating your own system?
So what I was about to say is that in that time, 10 years ago, I think we didn't have too much information about sociocracy, holacracy. I think that they even exist
Yeah,
10
I
years
think
ago.
sociocracy might have existed.
Well,
Holacracy may have
sociocracy,
been in the
yes, right.
very early stages.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
collaborative operating system was around, but no one knew about
yeah.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, sociocracy is for, yeah, it has like 100 years. Yeah.
Mhm,
But so in that time, we didn't have too much information. The only thing that we found was this Maverick book.
mhm,
Um, so we have to invent almost everything, or we have to figure it
mhm.
out everything.
Yep.
Uh, but we have some kind of values or drivers. For example, one of the first thing that we discussed at the beginning, the four of the founders, was that we didn't want to make millionaires.
Mhm,
And what we mean with that was if the money comes by itself, okay, but we are not going to look for an IPO or to 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 find a way to maximize money. So
mhm,
the idea was to have a place or to have a company that we can work fine and that people and make people happy around that company
mhm,
because we want to be happy and we want to have like a peace of mind company, right?
mhm,
So this was one of the first things that we decided, and I think it was important because it took away a lot of difficult decisions, or a lot of difficult um, ideas, or discussions.
This is
So
really smart, because actually the whole idea of maximizing shareholder value, how do we get as much money as possible? That thinking, which is promoted by the Chicago School of Economics and a
yeah,
lot of kind of classical economic thinking, has been shown by research to actually do all sorts of harm to the culture of
yeah,
organizations, and ultimately result in less profit than organizations that are trying to operate in a new paradigm way, where they're trying to maximize value for all shareholders, and not measuring value only in terms of money. What you wind up with, what the research says, is you wind up with much higher employee engagement. In the case of using like purpose rather than money as your primary driver, Korn Ferry found that it was 90% employee engagement for purpose-driven companies and
mm,
13
mm,
non-purpose-driven companies. That's a huge competitive advantage that would
yeah.
be absolutely insurmountable. So what did you find? So now it's like, okay,
Yeah, I
we care
think,
more about the
yeah,
experience and less
yeah,
about getting rich quick, and therefore what
yeah.
happened?
I think that this is one of the interesting paradox, because if you don't look for money and you focus on other things, maybe this is going to make a better, or a more profitable company.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a lot of company that was founded in the same time that we do, and it was interesting that they sometimes someone's disappear, some companies disappear, and
Mm-hmm.
others, they didn't grow as much as us. We right now we are like 85 people,
Mm-hmm.
and the other ones stay like, I don't know, 40, 20. So I think that if you are focused on the purpose, on the people, even if you want to be more profitable, you have to focus on people, and
Mm-hmm.
on the purpose, and
Yeah.
this is interesting for me.
Yeah, John
uh,
Mackey says that, the founder of Whole Foods, he says if the
mm,
only thing you care about is money, then you should operate according to a higher purpose, have good values, take care
yeah,
of your people. Like
yeah,
that's
right,
that's the way to make the most money. If you just focus on the money, you'll make way less money.
yeah, yeah. So, well, well, when we define what to do, or what we didn't want, what we started doing was to define, like, we are how we are going to make decisions.
Hmm.
The first thing that we defined was how we are going to make decisions, and we saw that the best way to make decisions in that situation was like looking for a consent
Hmm.
or consensus.
Hmm.
At the beginning, we saw that as a tool for making decisions. The
Hmm.
second thing that we think about was information, how we are going to deal with information. So we decide that we are going, in order to make better decisions, we are going to need a lot of information, and an open book management policy.
Hmm.
Of course, we didn't have that fancy
Right.
name,
Yep.
but we say that we will open all the information to everyone.
Yep.
Obviously, at the beginning, we thought that we are going to be only, I don't know, 10 or mm, 20
You weren't
people.
thinking about 80 people when you
Yeah,
decided to do
no,
that.
no, 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 no. And the last thing that we saw was that we have to share the profit with all the people involved in the company, and involved in making decisions. Because if you make good decisions, you need the impact of those decisions in
The
your purpose.
accountability, right? You need
Yeah,
to
yeah,
feel the effects
yeah,
of what you've done. That makes
yeah.
sense. There's a lot of
Uh,
talk about accountability in business, but if I'm keeping all the money, regardless of
yeah,
what you
right,
do, then
right. Yeah, yeah. And sometimes what happens with when I go to interviews is that some people think that, or ask me how they can improve accountability,
Mhm.
but they don't want to share the money,
Or the
or the
decision-making
results.
power,
Yeah, or the results.
or the
So,
information,
yeah. So I think that this is a contradiction, and
right?
and and it's a typical one. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
Now,
yeah.
how do I get my employees to be more accountable without sharing the profits, giving them
Yeah,
information, or giving them any power to make decisions?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
good
like
luck with
the
that.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
good. So let's go back to the decision making. What does
yeah.
consensus or consent mean in practice? Who
Well,
shows up when you're making a decision, and what constitutes a decision? Like,
bien. Okay. So consent is right now we use consent uh, yeah, as a tool for decision making, and
and what do you mean by that? Like,
yeah,
are you using the sociocracy
the,
definition?
yeah.
What do you mean by
Well,
consent?
the idea is that we make decisions in a collaborative way. This is
Hmm.
the main target. So, and what does mean? We rely on the concept, as I told you, of the wisdom of the crowd,
Hmm.
and
But I'm trying to get really tactical here. So let's say we
okay,
have to make
yeah,
a decision
okay,
about whether we need to cut expenses or something like that.
okay.
Okay,
Well,
because
the main
because
idea is that using consent decision making, you have to identify strong objections at the time of the decision.
okay,
So
but
you have
before you identify objections, how do you decide who's in the room when you're making the decision?
okay. Well,
Yeah,
in a
lot of people
tactical,
miss that one. That's really
yeah.
important.
Okay, okay. Well, uh, we have like three. This is an operational question, right?
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
have like three main channels to decide things.
Hmm.
The first one and the more important is that we have like a meeting, one time a month,
Hmm.
and it's like a strategic meeting where you can post uh, different proposals or subjects or topics that you are worried about,
So
and
anyone can post uh,
anyone can post
a decision-making topic to the
yeah,
monthly
yeah,
strategic meeting. Okay.
yeah, yeah, anyone can post it, and before the meeting we have to vote to prioritize all these subjects.
And who votes
So
to prioritize the subjects?
everyone
Everyone
has
votes.
three
Okay.
votes. Yeah,
So
has
anyone
three
can
votes.
come to the meeting if they
Yep,
want,
yep,
and anyone can vote on which topics are
yep,
the highest priority.
yep.
Okay.
So
And
the
everyone
idea
gets
there is
three
to
votes, and now
yeah,
you pick,
yeah,
and then that sorts out which ones go to the top.
yeah.
Great.
So if a topic is interesting for most of the people, it's going to be up,
Hmm.
and if it's not, it's going to be down. So
Okay.
the idea there is to prioritize based on the interest of all the people,
Hmm.
and after that, when we start talking about that subject, most of the time there is a proposal for that subject. So for
Hmm.
example, if I want to change all the chairs in the company because my back is hard,
Hmm.
and a lot of people is in the same feeling, so I'm going to propose to change, and I'm going to present the proposal.
Hmm.
So I'm going to say, okay, we are going to change all the chairs in different iterations. We are going to change the first 20 chairs, then 40, blah, 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 blah.
Hmm.
So when you present the proposal, what you are looking for is for objections.
Hmm.
So the question here is, anyone has any objection? And an
Great.
objection is the answer of the question, could you live with this decision? I mean,
Hmm.
it's something that is going to
Good. So it's a
make
low
you
bar. It's
live.
not, do you
Yeah,
love the
yeah,
decision? Do you think
yeah,
it's the perfect
yeah,
decision?
yeah,
It's can you live with it? If the answer is
yeah,
yes, then you don't say
yeah,
anything, and if
yeah,
the answer is no, then you object.
yeah, right.
Okay,
And
good.
this is a maybe it doesn't sound like too big difference, but it's a really big difference when you want to uh, uh, speed up
Yeah.
the process of decision making, if you are using of if you want to use consensus,
Hmm.
because if you look for everyone to be agree on something, it's really difficult. But
Hmm.
if you lower the bar,
Hmm.
is more achievable than in the other case. So it was a really impact for us to start using this kind of tool, because
And
previously,
how long does a decision typically take? So at the meeting,
well,
someone makes a proposal,
yeah,
they explain why, there's some discussion, there's a vote. How long does that process take? I imagine it varies, but typically?
Yeah, well, it depends. For example, we have an example before the lockdown.
Hmm.
We were really worried about if we should lock down ourselves in a, like in a previous announcement of the government. And I thought that this will take a long time, but it was really quick. In 2 hours, we decided that we should go lockdown. And if you want to go to the office, it's okay. But the recommendation is to go to your house. And it was like, yeah, 1 hour to top.
For a big
And
decision like that, that's
and
pretty
it's,
quick.
yeah. And I know a lot of companies that it took like, I don't know, 3-4 days, and even the people didn't know what they are going to do,
Hmm.
and it was a really mess, and we
Yep.
decided that in 1 hour, in 1 or 2 hours.
This is something
So
most people don't
yeah,
realize. I've seen
yeah,
research on this, that hierarchical decision making takes longer
yeah,
than collaborative decision making. This is something most people don't realize
yeah,
because they've
yeah,
only ever seen disorganized collaborative decision making, right? If you're going for consensus or unanimity or anything like that, you have to have a process. And if you have a good process, that process of getting to a group agreement actually is faster. Now, that
yeah,
shouldn't be the case, right? It should be the case that hierarchical decisions are faster, but they're not.
yeah, yeah,
And I can
yeah,
remember thinking about being in Oracle or being in the Navy and watching these really big hierarchies wrestle with stuff. And in theory, there's a leader who could just say, we're going
yeah,
left. But
yeah.
that's almost never what happens in
Doesn't work.
practice.
Yeah,
What happens
yeah,
in practice is there's all this debate and politics going on behind the scenes and stuff that takes
yeah, yeah,
forever before a decision actually emerges.
yeah. Yeah, and the other thing that is happening is that people aren't happy,
Mhm.
and it's most probably the people are not going to follow if they
That's
can
right. They'll
keep that.
undermine
They
or
are, yeah,
passively resist
yeah,
or
yeah,
actively
yeah,
act
yeah,
against a decision
yeah,
because no one asked them and they don't like the decision.
yeah.
So,
So
yeah.
in that case, it was really quick, but we have a lot of other examples that it took yeah, a long time. But I would say that when in any other company, in a classical or in a traditional company,
Hmm.
decisions take time.
Yep.
So
Yep.
yeah, making decision is a really big topic in any kind of company.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Good.
but we don't have that. The something that we don't have is a measurement of the speed of decisions, and I think that this would be nice to have.
Well, you have your felt experience of it from attending
Yeah,
these meetings every month for 10 years. So
yeah, yeah, yeah,
you got some data. It just may not
yeah,
be very scientific.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, how long is the monthly meeting?
It took like 3 hours,
Okay. And how many
sometimes
decisions
more.
are typically made in one meeting?
One or two.
Okay, great.
Yeah, one or two. And most of the time, what it's happened is that we start, how do you say, iterating the proposal or
Yeah.
yeah, redefining
Yep.
or yeah,
Hmm.
refinery. Yeah,
Sure, because people hear objections and they hear stuff and
yeah,
they make
yeah,
modifications, and
yeah,
that
yeah,
happens in many systems. So,
yeah,
yep.
yeah.
So, I'm curious, and this may or may not be a goal of yours, but do you
Mhm.
think that this system would scale to, 800 people instead of 80 people?
Yeah, well, right now this is one of our challenges. I think that we are getting the one of the, how do you say, inflection points. I don't
Hmm.
know if that's yeah.
Yep. Yep.
We have like a previous inflection point when we get the 40 people,
Hmm.
40 50 people,
Yep.
and then after that we made a lot of changes or a lot of tiny changes, and I think that right now we are getting that point again,
Hmm.
and I definitely think that this way of work uh, uh, is going to apply when if we grow up.
Hmm.
But definitely, I think that we have to change some things. For example, um, we are thinking to formalize even more we have like circles that the circles that you have in sociocracy. We
Yep.
have like task forces, for example.
Sure.
We have to formalize that and to define some roles in order to the circle of or the task force has a clear view of the purpose. I think that what is happening right now is that when you are a bigger group, you have to be more assertive or to have a more focus on the purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you are a small group, the purpose is like in the air.
Right.
But
You
when
can
you are
rely
a
on
bigger,
the
yeah,
interpersonal
yeah,
interactions to
yeah,
convey the purpose,
yeah,
but when it's big, you
yeah,
can't. Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's more
I've
difficult.
heard that many times from organizations.
So I think this is one of the biggest challenge right now. You have to to be more focused on the culture and to take care of the culture. And
Mm-hmm.
we always say that we don't have any problem of growing, but we have to take care of the culture. If we
Yep.
take care of the culture, we can grow as yeah,
Yep.
as much as we want.
So let's hear about someone asking for a raise. I loved when you told me about this one. So I want to hear how this applies, because this is a problem a lot of self-organizing organizations face, is how do we do compensation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in fairness, as Brian Robertson, a buddy of mine and one of the creators of Holacracy, pointed out, that uh, hierarchy doesn't specify how compensation works either. People are just used to it, right? So when you use a self-organizing system and it doesn't have a instructions on how to do compensation, that's no different than hierarchy. There's just more
Yeah.
tradition of how to do it in hierarchy. So what does it look like in this? So now we have an 80-person consent-based decision-making process. I want
Mm-hmm.
to raise. How does that work?
Well, yeah, this is an interesting topic. Yeah. Well, what we do in Champagne is that we invert the control of the classical process of getting a raise. Since we say that we don't have bosses, so someone has to solve that problem.
Mm-hmm.
And we say that it is your responsibility to decide if you need a raise or not. So
Mm-hmm.
we have like 3 instances in along the year where you can ask for a raise.
So they're
Uh,
scheduled the raise time.
yeah,
This is the time to ask for a
yeah,
raise.
we have like 3 different times along the year, and you decide if you want to apply to each of them or not. So
Mm-hmm.
this is your choice. And how do you do that? Is in 10 pints, everyone has like a coach or a mentor. Since we say that everyone is a pine because of 10 pines, a pine like a pine tree.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone is a pine, and every pine has a mentor that we call a gardener.
Yeah.
So the gardener is the one that is that is helping you to grow, to see your path, your career path, and to help you to do this reflection on your work.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say that you want to apply to the race. The gardener is going to ask you, what do you think? Why do you see any growth in these few months? So they are not going to say you
Help
if you have to
help
do it.
prepare you to justify it.
Yeah, right, right.
Mm-hmm.
And asking the hard questions.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the idea, and I think it's working really good. We have a lot of work to do, of course,
Mm-hmm.
but the idea of invert the control that the people has to propose them uh, uh, sometimes it's counterintuitive, because you will think that everyone is going to ask for the raise, but it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
happen that way.
No.
It doesn't happen that way.
No.
Yeah, and it's interesting how the self-control works here, and how the people has kind of a reflection about their work.
Mm-hmm.
And we have one example that a pine, when they when someone proposed them to have a raise, he rejected because he saw that it's going to be in a level that he wasn't feel comfortable with that. So it's similar to what we were saying previously. The peer pressure is really interesting, because it forces people to think about what they are doing, and how they feel with each other, right?
Yep.
And
Well, and this is something that's true in many self-organizing systems, particularly in the collaborative operating system, which is that your peers actually know how you're
yeah,
performing.
yeah, right.
and,
And
and
it's the
in a
best way to,
hierarchy,
yeah,
you might be able to trick or fool your boss,
yeah,
but you
yeah,
cannot you
Yeah.
cannot fool your
Yeah.
coworkers. So
Yeah.
if you're underperforming, everybody near you knows that. And now
Yeah.
when you go propose for a raise, they're going to say,
Yeah.
dude.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Now, you've also mentioned to me in the past that you encounter the reverse issue, which is that you have um, people who don't ask for a raise when maybe they should. Talk
Yeah.
about that a little
Yeah.
bit.
Well, after we have a meeting, so in that meeting, you propose yourself if you want a raise, and after that, we make like a proposal of raises. So we send that proposal to the whole company, and the whole company has to consent with that proposal.
So it's
So
basically the same as any other
it's
decision
yeah,
where it's
right, right,
presented at one of these whole
right,
company
right,
meetings as a
right,
proposal. My proposal is that I get a raise from this amount to
right,
this amount.
right.
Mhm.
So in when you see the whole picture of the races, you can see if someone is above another one of, or maybe someone didn't take account that with that race is going to be above that other, and in that instance is where you can say, hey, I think that this one is has to get a raise because it's going to be more balanced in the whole picture.
Mhm.
So this is how we work, and sometimes
So the proposal doesn't even necessarily come from the individual who's getting the raise. Is that what you're saying?
right, right,
Wow.
right,
Okay.
right, because what we look for is to have like a fair system of raises,
Yep.
and fair
Yep.
system of salaries, right?
Well, this was part
So
of my concern because if I
yeah,
have to propose my own raise, then that's going to bias towards the assertive people over
mm,
the non-assertive people, which is something that happens in hierarchies, right? When they've measured the wage gap and seen that the men are making more money than the women, the assumption often is that there's systemic sexism on the part of the people giving the raises. But when they've
mm,
actually researched it, one of the things they found, sometimes there is, one of the things they've found is that the men on the whole, on average, are more likely to be more assertive and they're more likely to ask for more money than the women.
yeah, yeah,
Whereas the women are going to work hard and hope that, and this is very broad strokes, obviously,
yeah,
hope that that work is perceived and they're given a raise. And so because they're asking, the men's salary slowly creeps up more than the women's.
mm,
And the same would be true. I mean, regardless of gender, a more assertive person would be more likely to get a raise than a less assertive person if you have to ask for a raise. So it's really interesting to hear that you
yeah,
have these other
yeah,
pathways
yeah,
for checking to make sure that people aren't being left behind.
yeah, yeah. Well, and right now it's a very sensitive topic, and we are really aware of that, and to to not generate a gender gap in the salaries. And this is one of the things that we saw sometimes when we are getting raises, because there is a lot of people, not 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 only women, that they don't they have like a this kind of how do you say, the intruder. Uh,
Yeah, they don't want to intrude. They don't want to take up people's time. They don't want to.
no, I mean there is like a like, I don't remember the name. Sorry, in English, but it's
You're
like
doing great.
yeah,
English is much better than my
that is
Spanish.
the yeah, that is the idea that you are an intruder and they are going to discover you.
Oh, oh,
Uh,
oh, oh,
so,
oh, 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 hang on. I know the word you're looking for. It's an imposter. That's the word.
imposter, yeah, the
Imposter
imposter syndrome.
syndrome, right?
Yeah,
Where
right.
the person feels like, oh my God,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not as good as these other
yeah,
people.
right.
If I ask for a raise, then everyone will
Yeah,
discover that
yeah,
I've
yeah.
somehow snuck into the company. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a whole psychological dynamic
Yeah.
behind that. That's
So,
absolutely, yeah.
and it's really common in our industry,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a really competitive industry.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so there are a lot of examples of that. So you have to be aware of not committing that, and escape from the unfair salaries. So
Right,
yeah,
right,
we
right,
are
right.
really aware of that.
Good. That's awesome. And we have a question here, and folks can start to type stuff into the Q&A because we're going to start to move towards Q&A as we get towards the end of the hour here. There's a question from Jan here that asks about the governors slash coaches. I think she's talking about the gardeners was
Yeah.
gardeners, not governors.
Gardener.
So
Sorry,
the
sorry about my
gardeners who
English.
tend to the pine trees, right? So you have this mentor coach type person. She's asking, are they employees? Are they people within 10 Pines? I think the answer to that question
Yeah,
is yes,
yeah,
right?
yes.
And then the other question she has is, do they get any kind of training or guidance about how to perform that role well?
Well, right now I will say yes, but it's not enough. I
Mm-hmm,
think it's not enough. This is one of the things that we have to to work more, because what we realized was that not everyone can be a gardener, and
mm-hmm,
you need some skills, and you need to train some skills in order to be a good gardener. So we
mm-hmm.
are working a lot with that, how to get feedback, how to communicate, a lot of human skills, not soft skills, human skills, necessary for
I saw what you did there. That was good.
yeah. So yes, we are working on that. I think that this is one of the things that we have to work in the future.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Great. I'm curious about this, back to the issue of transparency, about how that plays outside the company with external
Mm.
stakeholders like customers, for example. Is there
Well,
any difference between how your company relates to its customers versus how a typical software company relates to its customers?
yeah. Well, right now we don't have nothing like that. I
Mm-hmm,
mean, we don't share our information with
mm-hmm,
customers. We do share information with other companies similar to us,
mm-hmm,
just to have like uh, yeah, like how do you say, like compare salaries, or some kind
mm-hmm,
of numbers.
mm-hmm,
But what I think is that this kind of policies should be like reciprocal.
mm-hmm.
So because if doesn't work, if going in one way. So
Right.
if I will share information with my customer, and the customer doesn't share information with me, this is going to be
Create an imbalance. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And the idea here, and the idea for this to work, is that uh, it has to be reciprocal.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't work in the other way.
And have you tried it? And I'm not talking about salaries, obviously. I mean, I don't know what the value would be of showing your customers
Yeah.
all of your salaries. Maybe,
Yeah.
who knows?
Yeah.
But are there other ways in which this kind of transparency plays between you and the customers? Is there reciprocal transparency happening
Yeah.
between you
Yeah.
and the customers?
Well, I tried one time
Mm-hmm,
to do a training.
mm-hmm,
We also do trainings,
yep,
and I do a training one time with open numbers to the public.
yep,
So everyone's that coming to the training is going to know how much money we are going to make,
mm-hmm,
and what are the costs of the training.
mm-hmm,
And I think it was a really success about that, because
mm-hmm.
people was really happy to know what happened
Where'd
behind the
my money
door, right?
go? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it was really, it was a mess to because I do another crazy thing that was, you can pay whatever you want.
Mm-hmm,
You know my expenses, and
mm-hmm,
you can pay whatever you want.
mm-hmm,
And but you have to know that if you pay me $1, it's not going to be enough, right?
mm-hmm.
So it was a mess to deal with all of
Yeah,
that
all the
information.
all the logistics of everyone
Yeah,
paying different
yeah,
amounts
yeah.
is
It's really
challenging.
hard.
Yeah, my
Yeah,
wife did that recently, and it actually worked very well. But that one's tricky.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so the other
but
one that
but,
I've
but
done,
people
yeah, go ahead.
get, sorry, but people get really happy with that. And
Hmm.
in the last I make like a survey
Hmm.
to know what happened, and everyone agreed that want to keep that,
Hmm.
to keep the to know the where the money goes, and know the numbers of the training. So I think it's an interesting thing to work
Yeah,
on, to try.
yeah. So that one requires a little because the relationship may not be a persistent relationship. The person may
Yeah,
just show up to the training
yeah,
and then leave, and you might never see them
yeah,
again. It's
yeah,
a little bit different.
yeah.
We've tried that a couple different times, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't.
Mm,
The times when it worked really well was when we were either designing a training or considering changing the price for a training, what we did was we invited people who were interested in taking the training to review the finances with us, and showed them everything and said, well, here's how much it costs, here's all this kind of stuff, and asked them for input. It was like the consent thing where they could object and say, no, no, no. And it was really interesting. Even people who couldn't afford the training said we should charge more, which was a very interesting outcome. And we've even had done that where we invited people to participate or influence the design of the training. Like, do you have any proposals of how we should do this differently before they've taken it? And giving people that kind of influence increases their engagement dramatically. I haven't quite figured out the thing you're talking about, which is the pay whatever you like thing, how to handle that logistically. It is a bit of a mess. My wife did it recently and she made it work. It was she leads conscious dance for women. And so she had this event and she had all these women show up, and ahead of time when they registered, they decided how much to pay. And it varied pretty widely, but they all had to pay something, right?
Nice.
In that case, it could be $1, I think. And I don't think anybody paid $1. And
When there
we
is
tried
also
that
peer
once with a
pressure.
purpose program, and it really didn't work. I'm sorry, what were you saying?
No, that you can use the peer pressure too there.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that to publish what you are
That's what I was
giving
thinking
back.
just a minute ago. Publish what people paid.
But it's kind of aggressive. Yeah, but it's kind of aggressive. I thought about that, but I didn't
It
know
would
what
be an
people is going
interesting
to think.
experiment.
Yeah.
Now, if you really wanted to go in for the big risk, you could work on how much they're paying for the software project, right?
Wow. Yeah.
Now, I wouldn't necessarily say pay whatever you like. That might be the risk for
Yeah.
6 months of programming work. We're paying you $1. The
Yeah.
risk might be too high there, but you could
Yeah.
experiment with that as well. And it
Yeah.
would be very interesting to see maybe if maybe you make them anonymous. I don't know, but say here's what past customers have paid for, like.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we found useful was if you publish the number of how much the thing costs for you to make, people will generally pay at least that. Like they have most folks have this natural built-in resistance to paying you less than it costs to deliver the thing to them, unless they were really unhappy with it. So anyway, so more to learn there. Back to the self-organizing aspect of it, and folks, please by all means put questions in here. We've only got one so far, and I see you all lurking out there. Please type in questions. Back to the self-organizing thing, a lot of leaders are playing around with this idea of having a self-organizing company. And like you said, most of them are starting with hierarchy and trying to evolve to something else, right? Which is harder to do in my experience than starting from scratch the way you did. But even starting from scratch, I mean, that's like writing your own operating system for your computer, or writing your own word processor rather than buying Microsoft Word. Like you're creating your own operating system for your company at the same time you're trying to run your business, and that's a lot of work. So I'm curious what you think the kind of pros and cons, like what are the advantages and disadvantages of operating a self-organizing company? Like if you're speaking to leaders who are saying, stuff looks pretty interesting, but I'm not sure, what would you say?
Well, it's a really long answer, but if let me think about the advantages. I think well, you have a lot of advantages. One of the things that is interesting is the commitment of the people. For example, one interesting thing to use as a measurement is the turnover. So how many people is leaving the company? For example, we have like 3% turnover in in our industry is like 25 or 30. So it's
and turnover is really expensive. Like it's several times the person's annual salary to replace them and train a new person.
So the advantages will be like those kind of advantages. Like we were saying, there is a correlation between profitability and performance in the company and the organizational
engagement
health
and commitment of the people. Yeah.
Yeah. So the more organizational health, the more performance of the company.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that you have a lot of advantages there, and it's really interesting even if you want to be more profitable. So I have another reasons, of course, but I think if you are looking for that, is even interesting for that. So, and I don't know if I will say that you have risks, or I don't know. I was thinking maybe it's important to say that you can apply I don't know, like this open book management policy alone. For example, you have to think about that. If you are doing like an evolution or a transformation, probably this is going to be the last step of that. And in order to that, I will say that at least I can see two main warnings. One is that you have to train the people to read information, because uh, it doesn't matter if you share information. The important thing is that people can read that information. So this will be one of the warning. You have to train people to understand the numbers and information. The other thing is that it doesn't work if you have an unfair salary system, right? I mean,
Yeah,
this work.
right. If you publish, I actually ran into, it was someone who worked at a government agency where they had published everyone's salaries, and she said that basically it just made everyone depressed.
Yeah,
Because
right.
it reinforced the belief they already had that they were being paid unfairly, and then they could see everyone's salaries, and now they knew it was true.
Yeah.
So,
This is the trick that sometimes they tell me, well, if I publish my salaries, they are going to get mad. And
yes, they will.
Of
That's right.
course, indeed. So the problem here is that it's going to expose an unfair salary system. So if you have an unfair salary system, there is nothing that you can do to solve that.
Right. And
Besides
even if you
working
don't
on
publish it, people already know you have an unfair
yeah,
salary
yeah,
system. You're not
yeah,
fooling anybody.
yeah, right. So these will be my two warnings in this open book management policy. So training and
Yeah, go
fair
ahead.
salary system. Yeah.
And I'll just add as a disadvantage, and you didn't really mention this, is that it takes time and energy and effort and will to install and operate a system that people are not accustomed to.
Yeah.
And then you have to train everybody you hire in how to use this new system, which you wouldn't have to do if you were using the same system as everybody else.
Yeah. One interesting thing is that in our case, we have a lot of young people that sometimes is his first job. So they are not, how do you say?
They're not already indoctrinated into the traditional way of doing it. Yeah. Get them while their brains are still flexible.
Yeah. So in one aspect, this is a good thing. In another aspect, is a challenge. But in some aspects, it's an advantage, because you don't have to remove all different biases or problems that you have when you work, I don't know, 10 years in a company, in a hierarchical company.
And I've seen this happen where companies that are trying to operate in a new way and doing self-organizing behavior and stuff like that will go hire a seasoned leader from another company, and oh my God, it screws everything up because all of their instincts run counter to the culture that they're entering, and they're just used to people doing what they say, and the people keep pushing back, and they think they're being insubordinate, and they're not. They're violating the rules of the system because of what they're accustomed to. I've just seen horrible messes get created that way.
Yeah, well, we have some cases, and I think that it took like between 6 months and a year to get the idea and understand the idea how this work. If you are working if you were working in a different company or a hierarchical company.
But the payoff, as you say, the employee engagement, the commitment, the low turnover, the higher productivity, those are extreme advantages. And
for example, we don't have sellers, people to sell. And I think that this is an interesting, like a side
no
effect.
salespeople at all.
No, we don't have salespeople. Yeah.
It's a huge expense for most companies.
Well, actually, we don't have like support staff members. Like
So no
we don't have
support either.
no, no,
Yeah.
no. But the salesperson is interesting because we sell like how do you say, mouth to mouth.
Yep. Yep.
Uh, so because our people is so committed to the work, and so
So
committed to the,
everybody's a salesperson
yeah,
because they
yeah,
all love the
yeah.
company.
And most of the deals that coming from us is because other people went to another company and recommend us. So I think it's the best way to sell. And
Yep.
and even we don't want to sell people because we don't want to do that job, right? So I
Yeah,
think that this is an
everyone
interesting.
wants to be developing software. No one wants to be
Yeah,
selling it.
yeah, right. Yeah, yeah,
That's hilarious. I love that.
yeah,
I had no
yeah,
idea. That's
yeah,
right there between having no support staff and no salespeople. You've removed some of the biggest expenses that most companies
yeah.
have. I mean, the support staff a little less so, but the salespeople, that's an enormous expense.
Sorry if there
Um,
is some salespeople in the audience.
and there's research I saw by a woman who was studying companies that were operating according to some sort of organizing North Star. It wasn't self-organization, but it was like purpose or values or vision or something like that. And one of the things she found was that they spent way less money on
Mm,
marketing
mm,
and sales
mm,
because all the employees and all the customers loved the company, and
mm.
so they didn't have to advertise the way most companies do.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
that's a huge savings.
Yeah.
Um, and something called a net promoter score that measures
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
you might at some point like try measuring that and see what you get. I
Yeah.
predict it would be much higher than average for your
Yeah.
industry.
Yeah. It would be nice
So
to
yeah,
measure that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
good,
Well, that
good.
that's the idea. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting. And maybe there is some of the biggest, or the bigger profitability.
Hmm.
Maybe in those kind of adjustments is where uh, maybe you expend more in salaries or in profit sharing, but
Hmm.
you get a lot of money from avoiding this kind of other roles, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Yep. So we're going to wrap up in a moment. Any last points? We actually got one of our attendees asking us. Any last points you would offer to folks, particularly to people who are considering creating or transitioning to
Yeah.
some kind of self-organizing company? Any last tips for success?
Well, I always finish this idea with something that sometimes what it happens is that these kind of idea are overwhelming, and when you listen to these stories, it's like you think that this is impossible for me, or it's too much. It's an
Hmm.
utopia.
Hmm.
But um, I'm thinking that this is possible, and my advice, if I can say advice, will be
Please.
to start with something. Yeah, to start with something small,
Hmm.
and experiment and learn and try and try again and so on, and
Hmm.
to do baby steps at the beginning,
Yep.
with an eye on the last mile, right? So
Yep.
the idea is to really work in an agile way, but to start in an incremental way. So and I like a quote for an Uruguayan writer. It's called Eduardo Galeano, that
Hmm.
it says that many small people in small places doing small things can change the world. And I
Hmm.
think that this is the idea, right? To to
Yep.
to do small steps in order to get bigger things.
Yep.
So my advice would be start small and think big, right?
Yep. No, I completely agree. I'd say that to my clients who are wanting to transition to being a new paradigm organization. Pick one feature, right? Do higher purpose, or install a self-organizing system, or create a new set of values, or pick something. Do that really thoroughly, get the benefit of it, and then pick something else and do that. Don't try to do it all at once.
Yeah, yeah,
And I'm so delighted that you agreed to be interviewed by me, Jorge. I mean, I get to talk to you for one. I enjoy talking to you, but but real new paradigm leaders are rare, right? People who have successfully created an organization that's operating according to these different principles are few and far between, and most of them have, like Ricardo Semler, have books written about them and stuff like that. And so I feel really fortunate that I found you and I can show the world what you're doing, because it's such a great example. And even just your demeanor and the way you're behaving in this call are also examples of how this kind of leadership works, right? It's not about control. It's not about power.
Mhm.
It's not about making yourself seem larger than you are. It's about a commitment to a certain way of operating and to creating a certain culture and environment in the company, and then seeing what grows from that. And you really, I think, conveyed that commitment beautifully, not only in your words, but in your being. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for all this space, and to, I think it's important for me that you can see and you can and we can make visible that even in South America we are working that way, and
Oh,
there
yeah.
is only and and I think it's important for me because we have a lot of inspiration and books from USA and Europe, and we are doing a lot of effort here and a lot of work here, and it's interesting for me to show that that kind of work, because
I'm not sure that we're doing more than you are. We may just be louder.
no. No, no, no. Yeah, no, I know that there is a really big companies that is doing a lot of work, but I'm just the tip of the iceberg, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of other companies that is working in similar ways in Argentina and in South America, and I want to show the work, how we work, and how we do things. And I think that the really interesting thing will be when we can merge all the ideas together and have a more complete way of working.
Absolutely. And this is one of the things I talk about whenever I speak to audiences of CEOs, which is we don't know what the end result looks like. At this point, what we know is we know some of the features, and we have examples of what some of those features look like when they're implemented correctly and well, and what the results of that are. And you're a great example of that, Jorge. And so
Thank
is your
you.
company. So I look forward to when the travel is more possible and I
Yeah.
can come down there and have a beer with you, and we
In
can
five
chat
or
about
six
this
years,
more.
yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks, everyone, for attending. The
Thanks,
next
everyone.
talk
Yeah.
will be on psychological safety. Don't know
Wow.
exactly when yet. Next one's on psychological safety, another feature of a new paradigm business. Thanks, everybody.